So this is We Are Awakening, Book 1, and I'd just like to read the first few pages as introduction. It was clear from the start I existed. I had particular characteristics, physical and non-physical. Some of these were shared with other people and some were unique to me. Some I could choose, whereas others were given. I could choose my interests, but I had no choice over the colour of my skin. I had ideas about what I was and what I wasn't. All things said, I had a composite identity, and that was me. But that never seemed to touch it. After describing myself, I never felt like I had really said anything of meaning or importance. Perhaps I'd spouted off something about what I like to do, where I like to go, what music I like to listen to, etc., etc. But what did that matter? I just made associations with things, and that was not enough. I had used adjectives like they were sticky labels, but yearned to know what was underneath. Asserting myself as this or that never really got me anywhere. I just felt like I was buying into adverts, cheap imitations, when I wasn't any of those things. I was myself. But what was that? Through the social sciences, I became familiar with the idea that identity was a social construction. Basically, it didn't mean anything. Well, it did, but only because society said so. For example, wearing a hat was not an odd thing to do in itself. It was a perfectly normal thing to do. It didn't make me strange. I was allowed to reside in the perfectly acceptable, normal member of society section. But if I wore a crazy hat that nobody else wore, I risked being labelled a strange one, a deviant, potentially dangerous. To me, this all seemed a bit arbitrary. What did it matter? It was just a hat. But it seemed that collectively, groups of people had ideas about things, and these ideas were pervasive. Historically, they changed and shifted in gradual measure, but as it was, things stood for other things. Things were not just as they were. This, it seemed, was not allowed. Associations were strong, and they meant something. Meaning was not so much inherent as ascribed. Society told me that because I was this, I was that. Directly or indirectly, this social pressure affected how I thought about things. Whether I went with it or fought against it, I was affected by it. So to recap all that with a new example, a pair of pink underpants was gay. Maybe so, but it didn't seem quite right. They were just underpants. I started to probe, not into the underpants, but other things. I thought about collective definitions and assumptions and the pervasiveness of meanings that were shared between groups of people. One thing led to another, and somehow I got into thinking that the nation was a peculiar thing. I knew I was English, and that was part of my identity. But what did that mean? I asked people. They generally seemed to be waving flags and making something of it. Well, red post boxes, the Queen, and we are civilised. Yes, very civilised. Much like people of other countries, the English generally seem to derive some sort of identity from belonging to the nation. Part of this was a connection to the land, a segment of the world's earth. But there was also a specific set of social ideals that many people shared. Englishness was largely an imagined community with collective associations to things, like football and afternoon tea. I spat my tea halfway across the table. I wasn't going to settle for this. Not if this was what social construction was all about. There was little of tangible substance to go on. It all seemed based on taken for granted assumptions and associations. Regardless, this was something that was important to many people. A certain feeling of security or placement was derived from national identity. But I wondered how the nation could justify itself as such a powerful force in the world, something that some people were ready to fight for. It seems that where identity is concerned, sometimes people know what they aren't more than what they are. Identity is defined in opposition to other things. English people know they are not French, and French people know they are not English. But what does that mean? We are all people, right? All things considered, I am just as different to my next door neighbour as I am a French person. I started to travel and live in different cultures. I figured that if I could learn about different cultural identities, I might better understand my own. Perhaps I could place all these different cultural reference points around me to see where I fitted. I could find out through direct experience what I actually was. With a broader base of experience, I could work out my own position. This did not simply involve picking and choosing what I liked about a culture. That would just be making associations like I was in the first place. By experiencing new and unfamiliar sets of cultural norms, I hoped to debase what I saw as normal. I would have the opportunity to view things from the outside rather than from the inside. I would be destabilizing my own assumptions, thereby shaking things up a bit. By looking beyond narrow definitions and experiencing lots of others, it was possible that I would develop clearer understandings of the world and myself. I embarked on what I saw at the time as a stripping of myself. There were all these labels floating about around me, and I didn't understand if they were a part of who I was or not. So I began to throw out the ones I didn't need. I began hollowing out the bits of me that were not me. As I peeled the external layers of myself away and saw that there were other ways of doing things, associations lost their potency. In attempting to understand myself, no label of what I was could stand up to scrutiny. And if I couldn't identify myself with a label, what could I say I was? What was I? Nothing stood up to the light. I had hollowed myself out or peeled myself away to quite a significant extent. On close inspection, I had almost disappeared. Of course, I was still there, but I had shed a certain weight. This is hopefully where I'm coming from, closer to essence. I'm not interested in academic standing or argument. All that seems very much detached to me. It is removed from the reality of things as they are, observed from direct experience. Without the fullness of the experience to back things up, everything is just an image. It is not a reality. And how different the reality of the world is to all the secondary information we receive about it. How different are all the images that divert our attention, making us believe that the image is the reality. The reality is not the image, because the image is not the product of direct experience. The image is something we are presented with. As such, it is a fantasy. It is false and it is removed. Being on somebody else's terms constitutes a removal from oneself. With removal from oneself, there is no deep personal satisfaction. No true inquiry into the nature of things can be satiated on somebody else's terms. I want to write this on my terms, but first let me explain. My terms are broader than I initially understood. In searching for who I was, I came to realise that I am a lot more than I ever thought. And this is the truth of each and every one of us. I want the position I'm coming from to be understood. That's why I have described what I have. Searching for the truth of things does not come easy, and truth in its entirety cannot be presented to you by anyone else. Truths are realised through the direct observation and experience of what is.